there's a lot of unknowns. So I can't say for certain, was it FFP that stopped Fulham this year? I'd be surprised because the Mitrovic money was there. And that should help them. And you consider that they finished 10th last year as well, which was the first year of a new television broadcast payment deal. So whatever it was, and it's harder to get a clear, understanding of exactly what it is without knowing the numbers, particularly for last year, because it's just, you're projecting so much. The bottom line was that they weren't going to invest money. They weren't going to make that financial commitment this window. So that led to towards the end, and obviously Jimenez gets his hamstring injury. I think I put in my piece, it's at least a month for Jimenez. It's not a short-term one, that's for sure. And they needed a striker because Carlos Vinicius, I think, hasn't really lived up to the level I think we'd hoped. I think there's a lot. It's strange how he's evolved in terms of, could he get the starting position of Jimenez at the start of the season, as we saw Jimenez's confidence drop. But I think in terms of his technical ability, he wasn't the man who was going to fill in that role longer term. And then Rodrigo Muniz, who, was great against Burnley, and he's earnest and hardworking and shows glimpses of brilliance, but is very raw and hadn't actually scored in the Premier League. So I think once that happened, it's like, well, you definitely need someone in. And then we got a deal with the Breuer deal, which reflected the sort of financial status of January, which was, yes, there's a £4 million loan fee, but Fulham will not have to pay that if he makes a certain number of appearances. I think it's around 10, but I'm not 100% sure. That's how we got to that point. I mean, you mentioned about Ryan Cherky. I tried to check that. That was played down to me. I think there was definitely interest in a winger, but I think the flip side with a winger is you've got Wilson, who's got shoulder injury, who's coming back pretty soon. You've got Iwobi, who'll be coming back after AFCON this weekend, the final. Obviously, they've reached the final, which is terrific news for them, for him and Calvin Bassey. So it's not as acute in those areas. But I think the overriding conclusion for me anyway, and I think it'll be the same for most, is that there are still some long-term questions to resolve. The Mitrovic question still isn't really resolved, especially as Breuer is alone. There's no option. Maybe it works out really well and he signs and everyone's happy, but that's still something to resolve. Palhinha, there was the interest didn't materialise this window, but that's not to say it won't materialise in the summer. So then we go back to that issue again in the summer. And then you've got obviously Tosin Adrabayo's contract's running out in the summer. There are lots of different aspects. Willian's 35, 36, he's still going great, which is brilliant, but won't go forever. Tim Ream. So there's work to do, I think, for the summer, and I don't know whether that played a part in the thinking for January and just go, well, we'll sort this in the summer where we know where we are.
It does feel like Fulham, and look, it might work for a while, but eventually I guess the bubble will burst, have an amazing ability to kind of put a sticking plaster on their problems. And everyone's like, right, when is this big summer going to come where everything's going to have to be kind of sorted out? Because it just feels like Fulham have this ability to go like, okay, no, it's fine. We've managed to come up with a short-term solution to that one, a short-term solution to that one, a short-term solution to that one. And it's mostly working at the moment. I guess there is, and especially with the amount of older players that we've got in our squad, etc., Jack, but it does feel like maybe this summer's going to have to be the one, assuming we stay up, which is not 100% given, that we're actually going to have to make some tough calls and sell some big players and buy some big players.
Yeah, like at some point we need to become a smart football club, right? If we want to sustain this and, start to get in line with these things. And look, Peter mentions it. We don't know the exact ins and outs of the finances here. But what we do know is that the ticket prices of the Cottage are not touching these sides. And then this is why the debate is so fierce on that, of actually what this looks like. And there'll be plenty of people who will see these posts, will look at the protests, etc., and be like, well, if you want all these players and you want new players to sign, then this is what you have to do. And one, it's just fundamentally untrue. And two, you have to look at the wider run elements of the football club in order to categorise that, right? So if Fulham continue to buy 30, 31-year-old, 32-year-old players with no resale value, then we're never going to make profits on players. So it's as simple as that. And that feeds this cycle of needing to scramble around for things. And actually, when you look at what, I know it's a cliche to say what Brentford and Brighton are doing, but actually I was going to point to Bournemouth. because I think that when you look at what Bournemouth are doing in terms of the players that they've signed and turning into one of the younger squads within this division, you look at those players and you think, sell on value everywhere. Milos Kerkez at right back, Marcus Senesi at centre back. You're looking at a host of young players who you're going to go, either they're going to succeed or Bournemouth will be able to make a profit of them, or both. And what Fulham are is the exact opposite end of that. And I understand that different managers like to work in different ways. And I'm not suggesting that Andoni Iraola is exactly the same as Marco Silva, because he's not. And they like to play with different kind of players. And Marco Silva clearly rates experience, and Premier League experience in particular, in terms of the players he signs. But at some point, you have to think about what that means financially and understand that there has to be some sort of give and take between those two systems in order that Fulham can start to become profitable. And it's not about how many business lounges we can get into the new Riverside stand, although that does help, as Tottenham. It's also about becoming sustainable within the squad ages on the pitch and becoming, available to sell your players and being okay with that, because you know that there are replacements. And this is what frustrated me about the entire Andre situation. I think you're sitting there looking currently at about £25 million for a player that I think is well within his rights to suggest that he might be Brazil's next number 6. And Fulham are turning it down because they're worried about the fact that it might shift the dichotomies in midfield. No, if you bring in a player like Andre and you think, right, we've got a star here in the making and you've paid £25 million for him, then it's okay to sell Joao Palhinha in the summer. Now, I'm not saying they're the same player, they're not, but there is at least cover that allows a player to come in and Fulham not to be having to start from scratch when a key player leaves, as we saw this summer with Alexander Mitrovic. Because I tell you, if Palhinha had left and not Mitrovic, I think Fulham would be in the relegation scrap. And that's the problem, because the key issue was not addressed at the top of the field when Fulham did go, because there was no succession planning. And so if we look at Palhinha leaving this summer, which is a distinct possibility, and we bring someone in, and look, I don't know if Andre is going to be available in the summer, because I think that people are going to take notice of the fact that he's unbelievable. And I think it's more wild, to be honest, that they haven't already. And I think that then if you bring in a player and Fulham sign a 30-year-old journeyman, a Scott McTominay figure playing number 6 on his own for Fulham, which I like, as in, it gives me shivers, it's nightmares at night kind of stuff. I think that you're kind of looking at the idea that Fulham could collapse. And that is where I have real issues with the lack of succession planning.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing that comes to mind as well, and I think has to be considered, is you put Palhinha on he's on a 5-year contract that you've extended at a higher wage, probably the highest earner at the club.
Yeah,
what if that interest doesn't?
Wage, right?
What if that interest doesn't rematerialize in the summer, and then you bring in Andre, who, as you say, is basically going to become Brazil's number 6, and you play a system where there's 2, and they won't. Those 2 players are not in the squad to combine minutes, are they? It's not like Andre is like a.
Oh, I wouldn't
classify him as a development player.
I think they're different enough that you could play the 2 of them at the base of.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be ideal, but then
what
I'm saying is you then add. So you've paid for Andre, you put him on that salary, you pay Palhinha on that salary, and then you've also got, as we talked about, you've got to do a striker, you're going to have to do a winger, you've got to do a centre back as well. We keep saying, there needs to be a big summer. Of course, there needs to be a big summer, but also I think. It's not like, and this is where Fulham are hamstrung, because they haven't done the sales, or they haven't got these alternatives. And, as you say, there isn't that resale. It's almost like a vicious circle in a way. You don't allow yourself the wiggle room to do those other positions. And then you might do another short-term plastering one of them, and then that becomes a problem down the line. Like I can kind of get it. Is
the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time to start is today. Like that, as far as I'm concerned, like they need to get out of this cycle.
There are some players with resale value, though. I mean, we saw links today linking Robinson to Liverpool, and that could be a significant financial boost.
And then Fulham would have to spend quite significantly to buy another left back, because there's no one in the squad willing to take that rental on. This is the problem. There are none of this. So if the only player that I think has significant resale value where Fulham have already succession planned is Kenny Tete.
Yeah, he's got
the only one
within a contract.
But he doesn't have that much resale value, actually.
Well, and he thinks it's going to be a profit because he costs £1.2 million. So, I think you could sell Kenny Tete for £8 million, and the people buying him would get a steal, and Fulham would be able to mark a significant profit on that as well. So,
I think that the point I'm making is like, if you look at how much Fulham spent last summer, it's about 65. The summer before that was about 70 to, I think it was about 80 overall when you include Lukic.
Net?
No, just out for the spending. So not net. So obviously you can take off the Mitrovic element. But that's the bracket they're looking to spend, right? So, but it seems that way anyway. You then if you take 30 out, it's quite a significant chunk. And then you look at the positions. Is that the position you want to be spending that much of that budget going into a window? That's kind of that's the counterpoint, I think. Because you're not wrong. Like, everyone can see that. Signing Andre and having Andre and Palhinha would be fantastic. And it's the perfect succession planning. And if it was obvious that Palhinha would go in the summer, then great. But I think what we saw in January was, I think everyone expecting Palhinha to go, and he didn't. And we look at Palhinha's age, and he's 29. He's 29? Is he coming up to 29? It's around 29, isn't it? Are you going to get the same money for Palhinha? Well, I'm sure they should do. I'll get close to it. But I think there's an interesting element to that, which is not as straightforward, I think, is what I'd suggest. But I don't disagree on the point that Fulham do need to do succession planning. They have the oldest average age. I did a piece this month basically saying, I think Fulham have the oldest average age starting 11 of any team in the top 4 divisions in England. So it's quite clear what they've been going for. It's quite clear what they've done, and it's worked because it's kept them in the Premier League. But to sustain that, it has to evolve. You have to balance it. And I've put that to Marco Silva, and he recognises that. But it's always, he comes back and he talks about balance. And I think Fulham have to do that, because if they don't, then that progress, as you say, Jack, is going to be difficult. And then you end up in a scenario where you do get stuck and suddenly you're falling again.